Mesdames, Messieurs, bonsoir. Maybe it's a surprise for you, but I will shift to French, and the explanation is very simple. Je voudrais beaucoup parler anglais, comme notre invité de ce soir parle français. Donc, si vous le voulez bien, nous allons mélanger les langues. Monsieur Masood AHMED donnera sa présentation en anglais et puis we'll mix, comme l'on dit. Merci beaucoup, monsieur le directeur, d'être avec nous ce soir. Vous êtes bien sûr économiste, ce qui est très bien pour diriger le département Moyen-Orient et Asie centrale du Fonds monétaire international. En réalité, vous servez le Fonds monétaire international pratiquement depuis le début de ce siècle, avec une courte interruption au service du gouvernement britannique. Et précédemment, vous avez travaillé à la Banque mondiale. Et vous dirigez donc au Fonds monétaire international un département que je qualifierais de large, puisqu'il va du Maroc jusqu'à l'Afghanistan, ce qu'on appelait quand j'étais jeune l'arc de crise, ce qu'on appelle peut-être toujours d'ailleurs l'arc de crise, ce qu'on dirait en français réunir le Moyen-Orient, l'Afrique du Nord et l'Asie centrale. Vous venez ici dialoguer avec nous et je vous en remercie, et dans un premier temps présenter la dernière synthèse de votre département sur les perspectives économiques régionales de cette très grande région. Alors je ne vais pas me donner le ridicule de commencer à donner des commentaires sur cette région, mais bien entendu, votre rapport s'organise autour, j'allais dire, de trois directions, ou plus exactement qui forment un triangle terrible. Le premier côté de ce triangle étant évidemment l'effondrement des cours pétroliers qui pose de nombreux problèmes aux pays dits de rente, aux exportateurs de pétrole. Le deuxième côté du triangle étant les pays constitués par les pays importateurs de pétrole qui profitent bien entendu de s'effondrement des cours, mais qui souffrent du piétinement économique des précédents, les pays de rente. Et puis naturellement le troisième côté du triangle, c'est ce chapelet de conflits, peut-être cette nouvelle guerre de 30 ans, comme on dit en français, qui se développe dans au moins quelques parties de votre vaste empire. Mr. Masood AHMED, I'll give you the floor. First, we will have your presentation and then a Q&A period which will be surely opened by Dorothée Schmidt, que je n'ai pas besoin de présenter dans cette maison et je le fais néanmoins. Dorothée Schmidt dirige, chacun le sait ici, les études moyen-orientales. Je vous en prie, merci encore une fois d'être avec nous, monsieur le directeur, et you have the floor. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais commencer en vous remerciant et en remerciant toute l'équipe d'Ifri pour nous donner la possibilité de vous présenter nos perspectives sur la région. Et donc, moi, je vois cette session comme un dialogue, comme vous venez de dire. J'aimerais beaucoup avoir vos commentaires, vos opinions, et bien sûr, si vous avez des questions, je suis là pour essayer de vous répondre. J'ai une petite présentation de quelques slides. Et si vous me permettez, je vais la faire en anglais, juste d'abord parce que ça va être beaucoup plus clair pour vous et un peu plus facile pour moi et peut-être un peu plus court. Donc, let me start by saying one word on the world economy, because it is useful before we talk about the Middle East to see where is this fitting in the economic prospects for the world. And if I give you, this is our latest projection for the world economy in different regions. And if I give you the one sentence summary of the world economy as it is evolving, it is that the improvement in the economic recovery that was expected this year is not happening. it is the same as last year, more or less, the world economy. And the risks to the world economic outlook are greater this year than they were last year. So it's the same modest level of economic activity. The US, which was expected to be leading a bit more, is not happening. And emerging markets, many of them, like Russia, Brazil, South Africa, continue to have major problems which hold back economic activity. So this is one dimension. Let me ignore that. Second, I want to say one word about the price of oil, because for our region, oil is obviously a big part of the story that I will be walking you through. So you can see from this chart on the left that it is impossible to predict with any degree of usefulness and precision the price of oil. If you want to be precise, you have to take a very low degree of probability of success. If you want to be confident in your prediction, you will come up with a range that is meaningless. So if you look at the futures market are saying that if you want to say with 95% confidence what will be the price of oil in 2020, you want to be very sure of what you say. The range is between about $12 and $120. Oh, it's very precise, but it's useless. I think a better approximation is to say that if you look at the base projection, it's some improvement in oil prices from where they are. We've already seen it in the last few weeks. But by 2020, prices will be somewhere $50 to $60. Why do we think that? Mainly because with shale oil now available, whenever the price rises above that, 50 or 60, for any length of time, you can very quickly start producing oil from shale. Unlike traditional oil, shale oil does not require big investment and long production period. Within 1 year, you can get an oil well going with $10 million. If you have $10 million in 1 year, you can produce oil. When the price falls below 40 or 30, it becomes unproductive to run these wells. Again, unlike traditional oil, where you can run it at $5. The investment was made before, but the running cost is very low. With shale oil, it's hard to run it. So it's very hard for the price to go above that. Could it be low? Yes, possibly below that, but it's not likely to go above that. So what else is the region facing? So I think there are, apart from oil, there are 3 other shocks that are affecting the region at the same time. Conflicts within the region, having an impact on countries around them. The higher financing needs and costs of financing. Cost of financing is going up in part because US interest rates are going up, but they're also going up because the people in the financial markets are becoming more risk averse. Why does this matter? Because many countries in the region, including the oil exporters that were traditionally providing financing, now will be borrowing. So it's important for them. And the high value of the dollar has an impact because many countries in our region have their currency linked to the US dollar, and so it makes their products less competitive. Let's look at conflicts for a moment. This is it's a sad chart, but it tells you how the victims of conflict and terrorism have become mostly civilians and how that number has grown. And it also shows you that the majority of the civilian victims of conflict and terrorism are in the Middle East. So you can see what disproportionate numbers. And this is really, the conflicts have been in our region for a long, long time. But really, it's only for the last 15 years that we see this dramatic increase in the victims of a number of people impacted by this. Another thing about conflict, of course, is refugees. In Europe, refugees have become a very political issue. And I recognize and understand why that is, but we have to also recognize that 10 times as many refugees from Syria and from Iraq are being addressed already by countries inside the region with much greater pressures on them. So there is a bigger problem than what we see here. And final thing I want to say about conflict is that conflicts have a long shadow. Even after they end, it takes, on average, between 20 and 30 years to recover from where we have fallen in Syria. If you look at how long will it take for the Syrians to get to a level of income that they had in 2010. Today, the Syrian economy is about less than half what it used to be. The level of income has fallen by more than half. To get back to that level of income, just using history, maybe the future will be different. But if you look at the experience of past conflicts, it will take probably 20, maybe more years to get back to that level. And this says nothing about the people who are impacted during this period. So now, that's the background. I want to talk briefly about two groups of countries in the region. They're the countries that export oil, that depend mainly on oil, and they're the countries that are, as was said by Mr. David, the importers of oil. So let's talk about the oil exporters. These were countries that until 2 years ago had a comfortable existence. I'm thinking of the countries of the Gulf, Algeria, and the issue for them with the drop in the price of oil is that their financial accounts have been completely thrown out of equilibrium. So last year, this group of countries lost $400 billion in terms of their oil export receipts. $400 billion is a serious amount of money, even for the countries of the Gulf. This year, they're likely to lose another $100 to $150 billion because oil prices have come down further compared to last year. So what did they do? The first thing they did, which was a sensible thing to do, is that they used all the money that they had saved up before, in the good times, to finance the spending that would otherwise have been financed by oil. So instead of having oil revenues finance their spending, they tried to keep their spending the same, but now they draw on the savings that they had to finance it. Of course, they went into big deficits from surpluses. Their budgets all went into deficit. They felt our debt is low. Most of them had virtually no debt. We can borrow when we need to as well. We have our own savings. This will go away. But we realized, and by the middle of last year, I think they began to realize that this is not going to go away. This is the new reality. Oil prices are going to be much lower than they were for many years to come. So then they started to cut back their spending. And in fact, by the end of the year, they ended up spending less than people had thought they were going to spend last year. I give you one example, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia ended last year with a budget deficit of about $90 billion. That's a lot of money, given that previously they were running a surplus. But it's less than people were expecting them to have as a deficit, even in October. Even in October, people were saying they will have a deficit of 120, some people were saying 140, but they really tried to cut back in the last quarter to see if they could have a smaller deficit. And this year, they are cutting back even further to control that. How did they do it? They took different measures. Many of them cut back on capital projects. Capital projects are the easiest to slow down. So instead of building the next city or the next big infrastructure project, you slow that down. But others also cut back on current spending, and they all started to raise their energy prices. You remember that energy is very cheap in most of these countries. Even today, it's still subsidized in most of them, but last year they did manage to raise energy prices. In Algeria, they raised the price of electricity after a decade, and it created some degree of tension. But I think they were able to do that. However, they have a long way to go. So here's a chart I find quite interesting. It asks a very simple question. If you had to balance the budget for 2016 in each of these countries, and the price of oil was $50 today, how much more would they have to cut back? And what you see from this chart is that for countries like Bahrain, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Oman, the Emirates, they still have to cut back substantially more to balance their budgets. Even after having reduced their spending last year to this year, they still have to cut more, even if the price of oil rises to $50 today, which it's not. Now, they don't have to do it tomorrow, they don't have to do it overnight, because they have the savings, they can do it over time, but they have to do it. So it is a multi-year adjustment that has to take place. So one big challenge facing these countries is how to continue and sustain year after year after year for the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, cutting back slowly on their spending every year at a time when historically every year the spending has been going up, 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 up. So if you look at the spending from 2008 to 2014, it went up even faster than the price of oil in these countries. They were spending more and more and more. Now we are saying every year you have to cut and cut and cut. Now it's very difficult in any society to have sustained cuts in public spending year after year after year and to maintain the social contract. It's particularly difficult in a society where people believe that their relationship with the state is based on a job that you give me when I come out of university in the public sector, and you have to give me cheap energy and social transfer. So we're changing that. There are many ways they can do it technically. They can cut spending, they can increase some taxes, they could do a TVA, a VAT. But the issue is not the technical possibilities, it's how do you build a consensus that explains to people that you have to do this. And this is why, personally, I'm very encouraged by the vision that was laid out by the Saudi Deputy Crown Prince 3 days ago, because at least it explained to people what is the vision of the new economy in 5 years. Maybe it doesn't get fully realized, maybe it's, but I think it begins to give people a framework to think about the changes. Because if you approach each change one after the other, you will get opposition with each change. But if you explain to people the direction and the contract, it becomes a bit easier. So that's one challenge. It's also important for the Gulf countries to do this because they all have a fixed exchange rate with the dollar. To maintain that fixed exchange rate, to maintain the confidence in the fixed exchange rate, they also have to show that they are acting on reducing their deficit. Here is the other problem that I want to share with you. This is a chart with too many lines, so ignore most of it. Focus, please, on the first and last line in each country. The first line says, what was the average growth rate in these countries for the 10-year period between 2005 and 2014? And the last line says, what is the average growth rate that is expected for the 5-year period going forward? What you see is that in many countries, the growth rate for the next 5 years is lower than the one they have been living with for the last 10 years. So people have to be adjusting not just to getting less from the government, but the economies are going to be slowing down during this period. Why does that matter? Because really, these countries are coming to the point where the old economic model is no longer sustainable. Now, because the public sector cannot provide the jobs, they don't have the money. The public sector cannot continue to provide cheap energy, cheap transfers. This has to come from the private sector. But the private sector in these countries itself has been depending on the government to sell its products. So now you are asking the private sector to take on a new competitive role, which it will be hard for this group of countries to do. So I think the big challenge for this group of countries is how to balance their budget over the next 5 years in a way that will reduce their spending by substantial amounts, how to get the private sector to generate jobs at a time when the government is pulling back, and how to manage all this while keeping the social peace and getting everybody to come along with you. And that's going to be a difficult task, and I think that's one topic it would be very good to have a conversation about from all of you who have the political background in studying the political economy of change, is how do you see arranging that change in the contract? Now, I'll leave you this one for the record, but this is just a summary of the point. So let me move rather to the second group of countries, which are the oil importers, because there the situation is somewhat different. Now, who are we talking about? For us, we define the Middle East more broadly than many people. So we include Afghanistan and Pakistan in our definition, and Mauritania. Here I have to say there's good news. It's good news that after 4 years of relative stagnation, because they were going through a political transition, many of them, because they were being affected by high oil prices, because they were being affected by the slowdown and recession in Europe. Now you see some improvement. There is a recovery that you can see. So the growth rates in countries like Morocco, like Egypt, like Pakistan are beginning to see an improvement in 2015, 2016, 2017 compared to the period before. Part of it is due to low oil prices, but part of it is due to the actions that they themselves have taken to make some difficult decisions. So this is an interesting chart. It shows you how their spending changed in different periods. So in 2010, 2013, just after the Arab Spring, what did most countries do? They increased their spending on subsidies and transfers. They started transferring money to people, population, to keep the peace. Since they couldn't finance it, even though their budget deficits were rising, they cut back on investment. If you cut back on investment today, you cut back on growth tomorrow. So they were cutting back on the future to keep people happy in the present. Now you see a nice change in that. The governments have started to cut back on the generalize transfers and start refocusing their spending on investments. So that's part of the difficult decisions they made. Of course, they were helped by the price of oil being lower, because the price of oil, just as it was a bad news for the oil exporters, is good news for the countries that import it. A country like Morocco, a big impact on their balance of payment comes from lower oil prices. At the same time, this compensates a bit for the reduction that they're beginning to see in some ways for the remittances that they get from their workers abroad. And by the way, this is a problem going forward because many of their workers are in the oil exporting countries, and as the Saudi Arabia and Emirates start to cut back spending, one of the consequences will be that they will stop employing fewer people from Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Pakistan, India, and all of these countries who are benefiting from the remittance transfers from the Gulf countries, $100 billion a year at the moment, will begin to see some slowing down of that flow. But also, I do worry a little bit that tourism and exports are falling or slowing down in these countries. Tourism is being affected by security. One of the issues of conflict that we don't talk about as much as refugees is the spillover from conflict on neighboring countries in terms of the confidence of investors and tourists. You remember last year, there was this terrible 2 terrorist attacks in Tunisia, Bordeaux and then at Sousse. Tourism is 7% of the Tunisian economy, and much more in terms of employment. So tourism went down by half after those attacks. That's 3.5% of their economy was wiped away by that terrorism. That was the rate of growth they were expecting to see during the year. It ended up being 0 almost. So you took away their whole improvement for that year by those 2 attacks. So it shows you how devastating an impact it can have. And if you look at tourism in Egypt, tourism in Jordan, tourism in Lebanon, all of it is coming down because people are concerned not necessarily immediately about those countries, but about the effect of conflict in the neighborhood. And when you are making your holiday plans, you always become more conservative than when you're working. People like to feel more confident that they will be able to have their limited holiday when they plan ahead without the risk. Now, what can they do? So the problem for them is their growth rate is improving, as I said, but 4% is not going to be enough to generate enough jobs for the young people that are coming into the labor market in these countries. So how can they increase their growth rate? Well, one way would be to say, let's spend a little bit more, try to encourage growth. But they have one problem. They already have quite high levels of debt. So Tunisia's debt levels are going up, but Jordan, Egypt already have quite high levels of debt. They can't afford to take on more debt. So they can't really take on debt to invest because they feel that they're already feeling very much at the limit of what they can borrow. So they have to rely on the private sector rather than on public spending. But the private sector is waiting, partly because of security, because they want to wait for that, but also because if you look at the business climate, this is a chart that gives you how does the business climate in these countries compare with other countries in the world. The darker the color, the worse you are. So basically, if you're green, you're doing well in that area compared to your other competitors. If you are dark red, you're in the bottom 20% of all countries. So if you look in our region, look at those countries, there's a lot of orange and red. This is going back to 2007. And I'm showing you this for a reason. In 2007, if you compare these countries, you would say, when you look at corruption, you look at bureaucracy, you look at trade, you look at efficiency of the labor market, in all of these areas, our countries did not compare well to other emerging markets that investors are looking to invest in. Okay, what does it look like today? About the same. So even though these problems have been known for many years, we have not been able to make a difference in terms of making the political decisions that would improve our relative competitiveness. And in the meantime, even where we make improvements, others are making faster improvements. So when we say we want to attract investment into Egypt or into Jordan or into Lebanon, and we find that security is obviously one issue, but people look at our business environment, look at our indicators, and say, I don't think I can take the risk. I would rather work in a place where I can get my work done more easily. So this is a problem we have to tackle, but we have to tackle it in a way that is a bit more urgency if we want to show results for our young people. So for this group of countries, my bottom line message to you is, first of all, let's give them credit. Credit for preserving stability in economic terms at a time when they were going through a very difficult political transition. If you look at Tunisia, look at the difficult political transition they have gone through. Look at Egypt, look at Jordan and Morocco. The fact that they have not had political transition and economic instability at the same time is not something we should just take for granted, tick the box and move on. We have to recognize it was not easy for them. We have to give them credit for taking some decisions that have preserved that, but we also have to recognize that even though they're doing a little bit better, they're not doing as well as they need to do to generate the jobs and live up to the expectations of young people. And with every year that passes, those young people are becoming more and more impatient and less tolerant of the lack of results. So really, there is a sense of urgency that I think I can only underline. Here's the summary version of what I was saying for the oil importers. Again, this is mainly, I put in these slides so that when we send you the PowerPoint electronically, if you are interested, I'm very happy to share that with you. At least you have at the end a little summary version of what I've been saying. So I wanted to just end with this slide, which shows you what our final numbers are for this group of countries. And I want to make, what you see is all the oil exporters like GCC and Algeria, we have been marking down the growth numbers for them for this year and next year. This year is worse than last year for them. The country that I haven't spoken to you about, but I'm very happy maybe to say one word about before I end, is Iran. So Iran, you see, last year, no growth at all. This year, 4%. 4% is not bad. What is driving this growth in Iran? It's the fact that they are going to produce and export 600,000 barrels of oil in addition to what they've been able to do because of the lifting of sanctions. Also, because of the lifting of sanctions, they're getting some improvement in the way in which they can do business with the rest of the world. But, two buts to this. One is that the benefits that they are getting from the lifting of sanctions are much slower than had been anticipated a year ago, because banks are very cautious about doing business in Iran. Even the business that they technically can do under the new rules, they are worried about doing because they are not sure that tomorrow or 5 years from now, somebody will punish them for having done that business. So they rather wait. So companies are having difficulty selling products or doing investments because they need the banks to go with them, and the banks are saying, yes, we will come, but not today. They're like St. Augustine. They want to wait a bit. Now, if you look at, can you sustain, this is the second but, can you sustain this growth rate of 4% year after year after year? Or is it just a one-off? Clearly, Iran has the potential as an economy to make a huge contribution to economic outcomes in the region. It's a big country, 80 million people, 90 million people. It's got a lot of industrial tradition. It was an industrial country before oil. It is a big agricultural base. There are a lot of things that Iran could do. But to go and make the contribution, because its industry has been living in a closed shop for the last few decades, to open up and modernize, they have to change many things. They have to change their regulations, they have to change the banking system, make it more efficient, they have to be willing to bring in new technology, they have to be willing to partner with companies outside Iran to do that. And some people in Iran are ready to do it, but some people in Iran not so sure, because they're doing quite well with the current system. When I was in Iran 18 months ago, I was standing from my room in my hotel. I looked down on the roof of the building that was in front, which was an apartment building, and on the roof were the air conditioning units for that building. They were the air conditioning units you would have seen in Turkey or in Egypt in the 1980s. Large and efficient, old style, and not cheap. So the minute you open up trade, you will get very efficient, cheaper, better air conditioning units coming in from China and elsewhere. And they will want to come and invest and build those in Iran. It's a big market, it's a big country, which is great for the consumers because that will get them better service. But if you are the company, the corporation that is currently selling those old-fashioned units and able to sell them because there's no competition, you're not so keen to open up the market and find that your business is no longer so profitable. So I think in Iran it will be a little bit of a process where clearly there is a momentum for change, but there are also going to be some obstacles to the change itself. So let me end with this slide. And as I say, I'm really looking forward to your comments and your advice and your questions. But let me also say that if you do want to get an electronic version of the report itself and of the presentation, this is the address from which to get it. So,
thank you very much, and we put the address on our website. Thank you very much for this so clear presentation, Monsieur le Directeur. Juste une petite remarque sur votre dernier commentaire sur l'Iran. Je ne veux pas glisser vers le commentaire politique, mais il y a aussi une question de stratégie américaine, vraisemblablement. En particulier, je pense que les États-Unis n'ont pas très envie de lâcher la bride tout de suite à l'Iran et que le contrôle du système financier doit là aussi être important. Mais merci de ne pas me répondre tout de suite. Je vais passer la parole à Dorothée pour open the second round. Merci beaucoup, Dorothée.
Merci. Shall I open the second round in French? Je peux. In French. Alors, c'est un grand privilège de pouvoir vous poser des questions en premier parce que je trouve que les documents dont on parle aujourd'hui sont vraiment absolument fascinants quand on s'intéresse à l'économie politique de la région. On vit un moment de rupture, on vit vraiment une époque de rupture, puisqu'en fait on rentre dans une zone temporelle qui combine à la fois la faible croissance et une transformation vraiment majeure des conditions de la croissance en fait au Moyen-Orient. Avec certains aspects qui seront probablement structurels, qui sont liés à l'économie du pétrole, que les prix remontent ou pas, il va bien falloir à un moment ou à un autre travailler à la diversification des économies pétrolières. Des causes plus conjoncturelles, mais dont on ne sait pas pendant combien de temps elles vont rester conjoncturelles, c'est la question des conflits. Et je vois que vous avez quand même des prévisions de croissance très optimistes pour les pays en conflit. Si ça s'arrange en Libye et au Yémen, bon, ce qui est déjà en soi une belle preuve d'optimisme. Alors j'ai trois points. Le premier point, qui n'est pas vraiment une question, c'est un point de méthodologie. Je me demande aujourd'hui, quand on est économiste, comment on travaille en fait sur les économies de la région, parce que je pense que dans certains pays, alors les guerres bien sûr, la dégradation de fonctionnement des institutions publiques rend beaucoup plus difficile la récollection des statistiques et la mise en place des prévisions. Donc ça, je trouve que c'est une question intéressante, et la question de la croissance de l'économie informelle dans la région. Je sais que, bon, alors puisque je travaille beaucoup sur la Turquie, il y a un rapport de l'OCDE qui a montré que l'économie turque présentait un retour à l'informalité très important. Donc est-ce qu'en fait on a des formes d'économie de guerre qui se développent dans la région, et est-ce que les crises, les transitions politiques aussi amènent à une économie qui est beaucoup plus difficile à saisir aujourd'hui pour un économiste? Deuxième point, et on en a parlé un petit peu avant de commencer cette session, c'est la place des États aujourd'hui. Est-ce que les États vont résister à cette crise économique, et est-ce qu'ils sont en mesure, s'ils résistent, de mener à bien les réformes qui sont indispensables et que vous suggérez? Évidemment, l'avenir des États rentiers et, du point de vue politique pose vraiment problème, puisque comme vous le soulignez, ce pacte politique informel qui consiste à ne pas avoir de question de légitimité en échange de la redistribution de la rente, évidemment mis en cause de façon très évidente, et tous les autres États sont fragilisés par leur situation économique. Et ça m'amène à une troisième question qui est vraiment un tout petit case study, qui est l'économie des réfugiés aujourd'hui, des réfugiés syriens. Est-ce qu'il est possible d'envisager une économie positive des réfugiés syriens dans les pays qui les accueillent aujourd'hui? Et quel type de solutions créatives est-ce qu'il faudrait qu'on ait pour que cette tragédie humaine ne se transforme pas en un poids supplémentaire à long terme pour les économies des pays qui les accueillent?
Avant de passer aux autres, donc je vais essayer de répondre rapidement à ces trois questions. Donc, moi, je crois que le premier point que vous venez de soulever, c'est un point très important, parce que même avant ces guerres dans la région et avant les crises et les conflits, la qualité des données de base statistiques pour mesurer, pour essayer de prendre des décisions politiques, économiques, bien informées, était beaucoup plus faible qu'on aurait pensé, étant donné le niveau de développement économique de ces pays. Donc il y a déjà une position de départ qui était faible. Et bien sûr, aujourd'hui, si on parle de la Syrie, où je vous dis que l'économie syrienne est actuellement à peu près entre un tiers et une moitié de ce qu'elle était avant. Bah, c'est une estimation basée sur les estimations de plusieurs personnes, dont il y en a quelques-uns qui sont dans la salle. C'est très difficile pour nous, surtout parce qu'aujourd'hui, les décisions des gouvernements sont basées non seulement sur des données traditionnelles, classiques, statistiques, mais aussi sur big data pour essayer de comprendre comment le secteur privé, les agents économiques vont réagir à quelques décisions politiques, économiques. Et donc, pour tout ça, je crois qu'il y a un grand travail à faire. Et non seulement sur les pays en conflit, mais dans toute la région, pour moi. Deuxième question, c'est le rôle des États. Parce que ça, c'est difficile. Ça va être difficile parce que c'est un changement, c'est une modification du contrat social dans ces pays. Pour changer le contrat social, vous changez un peu les relations entre les citoyens et l'État. Et donc, si ce n'est plus une question d'un État qui va vous donner tous, effectivement, l'emploi, le logement, l'énergie. Maintenant, c'est vous allez donc travailler pour gagner tout ce dont vous avez besoin. Ça changera aussi un peu comment l'État va, comment dirais-je, relate à vous. Et donc, moi, je crois que ce qui deviendra beaucoup plus important, c'est la capacité des États de convaincre les gens, de faire un travail de communication, de persuader des gens. Et communication, surtout communication par les États, par l'administration publique, ce n'est pas quelque chose qui était dans notre région un point fort. D'ailleurs, pour plusieurs gouvernements dans la région, dans le passé, la communication était quelque chose qu'on faisait après. Donc, on prenait des décisions, si on avait le temps, on informait les gens. Mais c'était un processus d'information. Maintenant, la communication est un atout, c'est un, comment j'appelle, un policy making tool. Parce que vous ne pouvez plus prendre des décisions économiques, politiques sans avoir convaincre des gens. Donc ça, c'est un changement du rôle de communication. Dernier point, c'est est-ce que c'est possible de changer un peu la dynamique des réfugiés et de la mettre beaucoup plus positive, les gens qui contribuent à la société, pas uniquement les gens qui sont là et donc tout le monde essaye de s'occuper de ces réfugiés. Sur le plan économique, effectivement, c'est tout à fait clair. C'est ce qu'il faut faire. Sur le plan économique, vous pouvez voir l'avantage d'intégrer des réfugiés peuvent contribuer au lieu d'être des dépendants de la société. Ils deviendront donc les gens qui contribuent au développement économique, à l'activité économique. Et d'ailleurs, en Jordanie, une partie de ce contrat qui a été établi entre la Jordanie et la communauté internationale dans le contexte de cette conférence qui a eu lieu à Londres le 11 février cette année était effectivement de créer quelques zones d'entreprise en Jordanie où les réfugiés et les gens de la région auront le droit de travailler sur les projets et dans les entreprises qui seront financées d'une partie par la communauté internationale. Mais vous voyez aussi clairement aussi que sur le plan social, politique, c'est très difficile pour la communauté, disons, haute, d'essayer de voir que les réfugiés non seulement sont là, mais aussi qu'ils ont les mêmes droits, qu'ils sont financés par la communauté internationale, tandis qu'eux-mêmes, ils ne voient pas la même qualité d'aide qui viennent vers leurs besoins. Donc ce sont parfois des communautés qui ont des besoins aussi importants et urgents. Donc c'est là une question où la solution économique et la réalité sociale sont parfois non convergentes.